So unless you've been living under a rock, you know that the MLB has sort of a cheating problem right now with pitchers using sticky substances. Now, I've done my best to sort of stray away from this topic because it is newsworthy, but it's mostly negative, and it mostly fixates on how pitchers will become worse once the substances are gone. But I'd be remiss to not bring this news up in light of today's topic, which is another cheating pitcher. Now, it's not Garrett Cole or Max Scherzer or Adam Wainwright. In fact, it's not even a pitcher that's active right now. For this pitcher, we're gonna have to go back to the 1980s. He didn't use sticky stuff or anything like that, but he definitely had his own creative way of doctoring the baseball. Funnily enough, his most famous seasons came for the Houston Astros, who I'm sure you're familiar with for their cheating tendencies. I'm not one for living in the past, and the Astros are a very fun team to watch, but while doing research for this topic, it was definitely ironic to learn that this pitcher's glory days came in Houston. So today, we're going to be talking about the original cheating pitcher, and how his era of dominance nearly carried his team to the World Series, while arousing suspicion from pretty much every team he faced along the way. And despite evidence being collected against him, and even him being filmed every start of his 1986 Cy Young campaign, he was never punished. This is the story of the original cheating pitcher, Mike Scott. In the world of sports beat writing, there are dozens of transactions every day, so much so that it becomes hard to keep track of. Yet sometimes, these moves end up becoming noteworthy because of their long-term effects. In December of 1982, nobody thought much of a transaction between the Mets and the Astros, where New York acquired a left-handed pinch hitter in Danny Heap, the man they'd send away in exchange, while he'd haunt them and baseball for years and years. First, let's talk about what he did as a Met. Mike Scott was battered around during his time in New York. He had an electric fastball with decent movement, but nothing really to back it up other than limp breaking pitches that hitters feasted on. In his 4 seasons as a Met, Mike Scott had a 4.64 ERA in 364 innings, with an ERA above 5 in his final blue and orange season. Mike Scott had actually complained to his club about right shoulder soreness in 1982, citing it as the reason for his erratic velocity. For those who don't know, his fastball would clock in anywhere from 83 to 94 miles per hour, which is an insanely wide range for a pitcher. This likely was because of manager George Bamberger, who sternly employed baseball's only 4-man rotation out of necessity. Soon after, Mike Scott was diagnosed with tendonitis in his shoulder, deeming him damaged goods, and this was mainly the reason he was shipped out of town for scraps. In Mike Scott's own view, he said that he probably needed a change. He wasn't going anywhere with the Mets, and the change of scenery was probably a good thing. Mike Scott showed up in Houston, injured and with only a $32,000 salary to his name. He pitched relatively well in his first go in Houston in 1983 as their number 5 starter, but he quickly regressed the following season. Mike Scott said that he had a very real fear that his playing days would be over after the 1984 season. This is when he met a man named Roger Craig. Let's turn the clock back for a second. Back in 1980, Roger Craig was working as an instructor for the San Diego School of Baseball, determined to try and find a breaking pitch that wouldn't hurt the developing arms of his teenage students. He utilized a forkball grip, but gripped the ball farther from the palm and whipped it with a fastball motion. This birthed the split fastball. Craig would teach this pitch to Jack Morris, Dan Petrie, and Milt Wilcox as pitching coach for the Detroit Tigers later on. That team would go on to win the World Series in 1984 on the backs of their strong starting rotation led by pitching coach Roger Craig. And although he'd resign after the championship run, he'd have one more student slot left from Mike Scott. The duo quickly discovered that Scott's large hands were perfect for throwing splitters. It was a match made in heaven, and Scott was instantly a new pitcher in 1985, his breakout season. With a new weapon in his arsenal and confidence he had never had before, Scott lowered his ERA a run and a half between seasons, and set a new career high in innings pitched thanks to less arm strain from throwing mostly splitters. But with his success came suspicion as well. It started with a Cubs-Astros game in May of that year, where Bull Durham, then first baseman for the Cubs, found scraps of sandpaper near the mound between innings. In a post-game quote, he described it as brand new, cut in a circle, and just big enough to hide in a glove. No action was taken against Mike Scott though, and his ascension would progress rapidly in 1986. Mike Scott would win the Cy Young in 1986, and deservedly so. Before this season, Scott had never struck out more than 9 batters in a game in his entire career. But in 1986, he struck out 9 or more batters in 19 of his 37 outings. He led MLB that year in ERA, ERA+, innings pitched, strikeouts, fielding independent pitching, whip, hits per 9 innings, strikeouts per 9 innings, and strikeout to walk ratio. Simply put, Nobody was more dominant on the mound in 1986 than Mike Scott. He had become the master of the splitter and a monster amongst the league, a monster that Roger Craig had once created and now feared. In June of that year, Roger Craig, now manager of the San Francisco Giants, asked umpires to check Scott's baseball for scuffs on 3 different occasions in the game. The Giants were even filming Scott's every move during the game looking for credible evidence of him cheating. But once again, Mike Scott came away clean. And as revenge, he'd throw a no-hitter against San Francisco later that year to clinch the West for Houston. In a post-game quote, Roger Craig said, "Why did it have to be me who taught him that damn pitch?" before ultimately tipping his cap. All of this suspicion and dominance culminated in the National League Championship Series showdown with the Mets, the winningest team in baseball and MLB's cockiest club. The suspicion initially sprouted from Gary Carter, catcher for the Mets, who caught Mike Scott in an inning in that year's All-Star game. Gary Carter noted that he had checked the ball and it was scratched big time. Mike Scott would get the nod in Game 1 against New York's potent lineup featuring Darryl Strawberry amongst other great hitters. But what would come next would shock everyone. Despite leading the National League that year in runs, hits, and batting average, the Mets lineup would be completely stymied. Mike Scott held them scoreless in a complete game 5-hit shutout, walking just 1 batter and striking out 14 Mets in the process. That was the most strikeouts for a starter against the Mets that year, and it came at a pretty good time. The Astros would win 1-0, but the Mets maintained their suspicion of Scott's wrongdoing and had a plan for his next start. His next start would come in Game 4 of the series, and he once again dominated. He didn't allow a hit until 2 outs in the 5th inning and went the distance once again against New York. He had now hurled 18 playoff innings with just 1 earned run allowed. But along the way, bat boy Mike Ruffino retrieved every discarded ball and placed them in a milk crate in the Mets dugout. The Mets collected 17 baseballs that game, all with Oreo cookie-sized scuffs in the exact same area. Catcher Ed Hearn said that when most pitchers rub up a ball, they spin it in their hand to take the sheen off the shine. But Mike Scott rubbed it hard in just one place, and that's how you scuff a baseball. The president of the National League, Chub Feeney, was presented with this evidence, with the Mets requesting that Scott be banned from postseason participation. But Feeney did nothing with the evidence, fearing a storm of criticism and outcry, and the supposed cheating went unpunished. Luckily for the Mets, their only 2 losses would come against Scott in that series, and they'd win the NLCS 4-2 and eventually the World Series soon after. Mike Scott would still be named the MVP of the NLCS for his efforts, and he and Jeff Leonard of the Giants the following year would become the last 2 NLCS MVPs to come from the losing team. This NLCS would be the peak of Scott's notoriety, however. In the following seasons, Mike Scott would enjoy more success in Houston. He'd make 2 more All-Star teams and place second in Cy Young voting in 1989 as a 34-year-old. His career would end abruptly in 1991 as a 36-year-old, where he made just 2 starts before hanging up his cleats. In an interview where he was asked if he'd ever admit to scuffing or cheating, Mike Scott said, "That'll be in my book, I promise." When asked if he'd planned to write this book, Scott said, "I'm not." Perhaps the greatest cheating pitcher in history got away with it completely scot-free. No pun intended. Okay, maybe a little pun intended. Mike Scott's 4-season run of dominance was unlike anything the MLB had seen in the 1980s. He placed top 5 among all starting pitchers in ERA, strikeouts, and strikeout-to-walk ratio, and was top 3 in fielding independent pitching, batting average against, and had the best whip of any starting pitcher in those 4 years. He was on the same staff as Nolan Ryan, but still was the best pitcher on several occasions. And it's definitely crazy to think about the fact that Mike Scott won a Cy Young and Nolan Ryan never did. My buddy Baseball Historian did a pretty good video on this recently, so go check that out. All in all, Mike Scott was caught on several occasions, but never went punished. And I think that makes him one of the most cunning cheating pitchers of all time. He also paved the way for many split-finger fastball pitchers we see nowadays. And his story is definitely as compelling as it is perplexing, which made putting together this video all the more fun for me. But anyways, that'll do it for today's video. If you liked the video, make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell for all future notifications. And if you're feeling it, stick around for a quick word from today's sponsor. But that'll do it for me. I'm the Jolly Olive, and I'll see you guys next time. I'm once again here to tell you guys about the awesome products going up at manscaped.com, specifically the Lawnmower 4.0. It's been one of their most successful selling products in their history, and for good reason. It has an assortment of different features, including waterproof technology, multiple different scales for precise shaving, LED lights, and a 7,000 RPM motor. That's double the RPM of the average curveball or slider from a sticky stuff user. So you can get this product and many more on their website. But to help you out, you can get 20% off and free shipping with my promo code OLIVE. Manscaped has been a sponsor of mine for quite a while now, and they've been very good to me, and I think they'll be good to you too. So go check out what they have to offer. Link in the description below.